going to pass, and it's going to be very popular. It's going to have lots of adjustments before it ends. But the end result would be a very, very massive, the largest in the history of our country, tax cut.
Welcome back to The World Over. That was the president with his prediction on the fate of the tax bill in Congress. The U.S. Senate took a big step forward on Tuesday when the legislation cleared the Budget Committee. The full Senate is expected to vote on the bill by week's end. To discuss, we're joined by House Financial Services Committee member and U.S. Congressman from Wisconsin, Sean Duffy. Welcome back,
Raymond,
Congressman.
Good to see you. Thanks for having me on.
Okay, Larry Kudlow, who advised with the president, has been on this show a number of times, selling the tax bill, is now on the record saying this is not a true tax reform bill. He worries about the individual side of this, how it will affect individual taxpayers. A legitimate concern?
If you're talking about individual taxpayers who are making $5 million a year in a salary, yes, Larry should be concerned. But if you're a middle-income American, your tax rates are going down. And it's going to be easier and more simple to file. So if you're a family of four that makes $60,000 or $80,000 a year, you're doing great under this bill. But not only that, Raymond, we're bringing our corporate rate from 35% to 20%, making America competitive again. We know we just don't compete state by state. We compete against China and India and Vietnam. We're going to make our American companies compete on the world stage, be able to bring money and jobs back home, which is great for our families and economic growth.
Okay, the Congressional Budget Office, nonpartisan, they've rated this, and they claim that this tax plan will add $1.4 billion to the debt, $1.4 trillion to the deficit over 10 years. Are you comfortable with that?
So I disagree with those numbers because they look at the current pie, the current economic pie. What I see this is when you have more economic growth, you grow the pie and you bring in more revenue. So no, I see this as people make more money. And when they make more money, they get to pay more taxes. And so I see this actually helping us address our debt as opposed to putting us further in debt. Economic growth, if we can cap our spending, is our pathway out of a $20 trillion debt scenario and almost $1 trillion in deficits every year. The way you get there is growing economies, and tax reform is the way you get to grow.
Okay, I need to throw this at you. Senate Budget Committee member, Democrat Patty Murray from Washington State, had this to say about the tax bill in that it repeals the Obamacare individual mandate, a concern for Senator Murray. Watch.
There's no reason, absolutely no reason, this has to include a health care provision that would lead to 13 million more people without insurance. This is a bad bill. Now, it's not if you're a millionaire or billionaire, then it's pretty good. But for workers and patients and the middle class and those who go to work every day just trying to join the middle class, it's awful.
Why add repealing this Obamacare mandate to a tax bill? The CBO says this is going to add to the burden of people making under $30,000 a year.
So take a step back, Raymond. This is a mandate that requires American families to buy something they may not want. So what we're actually doing is giving people the freedom to say, I don't want to have insurance. So how does that hurt families? To say if you're a middle income individual, you're a construction worker, you can choose not to buy insurance. Nothing's wrong with that. You haven't taken anything away from anybody except empower them to control their own life.
Well, the CBO and Senator Murray would say, but you're asking them now to pay out of pocket for what they're essentially getting at a reduced rate, or they're getting benefits, they're getting government supplements to pay for their health care now. You're taking that away.
What we're really doing is saying, no, you know what, if you don't buy health insurance, I'm going to tax you for it. I'm going to force you into a health insurance plan you may not want, and if you don't do it, I'm going to raise your taxes. What we say is, let American families pick and choose what's right for them, whether they want to be in or want to be out. I think that's what's important. Now, if I was to take a step back, I might say, is it the smartest play to make for Republicans to put this Obamacare provision in the tax code? Maybe not, because I think most Americans agree that we need tax reform in America. And what you're going to do is by putting in a provision of Obamacare, give Democrats a reason to not vote to lower rates for the American family and for American business. And it's an escape card for them, when I think the pressure would be hot to vote for this tax reform bill.
Earlier this week, Nancy Pelosi, the minority leader in the House, and Chuck Schumer, the minority leader in the Senate, were to meet with the president. He, in anticipation of that meeting, sent out a tweet saying they're not going to, they essentially want concessions on immigration and DACA kids, and we're not going to be held hostage to that. We need to lower rates for the American people. He blew up the meeting. Your thoughts, are we headed for a government shutdown?
So first off, I have to ask, does Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi think they won the last elections and control the Senate and the House? No, they don't. They actually lost. And we're talking about funding the government, making sure we have enough money to help support our troops. We've all heard of the accidents that have happened, the men and women who have lost their lives because we don't have our military up and ready to go. We want to make sure we take care of military spending and military men and women, and to shut the government down because of DACA kids, I think would be foolish. Now, they might try to make that play call, and by the way, I think we need to deal with the DACA kids, but you don't deal with it with a threat to shut down the government, which is exactly the play I think Nancy and Chuck are starting to make, and I think that'll blow up in their face. Now, this is going to be complicated. I think it's going to come down to the wire. I might not go home and see my 8 kids. I might be stuck here in Washington. I might come over to your house before
you
Christmas.
Can come over.
Because this is going to come down to the wire.
Here's my question. Peggy Noonan, I just heard her the other day saying, Donald Trump just doesn't know how to make a deal. That by blowing this up, he's jeopardized the tax plan or the budget. Do you think that's true?
Some might call him crazy. I call him brilliant. He knows how to play the people that he's engaged with. He's done it in business, and now he's done it in politics. And what I find is he's usually a step or two ahead of those he's negotiating with. I think it's fair to say he's smoking out Chuck and Nancy. He's bringing them out and saying, I could potentially shut down the government over Christmas because of kids who came here unlawfully, especially when Republicans and the president said, we can deal with this at a later point. There's no rush right now. And I think he's setting up the argument to the American people that can put Chuck and Nancy in a box.
What happened to the Schumer rule? I'm old enough to remember in 2012, I think it was, Chuck Schumer had a rule, and his rule was don't attach policy considerations to spending bills to keep the government going.
That's right.
Because he was upset because Republicans were trying to attach things to the budget. And you can't do that, he said. Now he's doing that.
He's trying to attach policy, the DACA kids, to the budget. And again, I think it's a mistake. I don't think it's going to work for them. But what's important, Raymond, and again, you hear these stories almost every week about planes that crash, boats that crash into each other in our military. We need to make sure we drive consistency and sustainability into the funding of our military to make sure they can do their job. And that's what's at risk in this bill.
I need to ask you about something that I know you've been talking about for years, the Consumer Federal Protection Bureau. Now, this is a group founded by Elizabeth Warren, Senator Elizabeth Warren, and it was in theory to help protect American consumers from fraudulent or what's the term I'm looking for? Unregulated credit card companies or loan agencies taking advantage of the American people. What's wrong with that, and what's wrong with the agency?
So, first of all, I support consumer protection. If you're being taken advantage of or you're being deceived by a credit card company or a financial institution,
predatory lender,
we should fight for people so they get a fair deal. That's not what this agency is actually doing, Raymond. They're imposing rules and regulations that big banks they can comply with, they can deal with. But those rules and regulations on the smallest banks in America, the credit unions in America that serve rural America, they can't comply with those rules and regulations, and either they're forced to consolidate or they're forced to go out of business. Not only that, this agency will say, well, we've collected billions of dollars for consumers. Do you know what they're doing, Raymond? They're shaking down businesses. So the business will say, when the shakedown comes, do I want bad press from the CFPB, or do I just want to pay them off?
And it's a completely unregulated agency, we should say. You all can't do anything about it. Neither can the president. It was set up that way. It's paid and funded through the Federal Reserve.
Right, so they draw their money for the Federal Reserve. And you know that the Congress appropriates money per the Constitution. We fund agencies,
but
not with this one. They can draw up to over $600 million a year to fund themselves, and they have one very powerful director, which means that they can say they're advocating for consumers, but if they don't, who can stop them? The Congress can't, and that means the people can't. And what's important, but one last point on this. Why do you make an agency like the CFPB unaccountable to the American people? If they're doing the good work of the American people, you shouldn't fear the American people. But if you're going to promote a progressive, liberal, Elizabeth Warren-esque agenda, you want to separate them from the people so the people can't take them down. And that's the way this organization has been set up. It is everything that's wrong with an unaccountable government.
So you say it's partisan as well?
Oh my God, listen, if you look at the contributions, almost 600 contributions for Democrats to 1 for Republicans. But not only that, there was a litmus test on who can actually be hired in the CFPB, and they were very good at making sure they're bringing in progressive Democrats. And consumer protection, it's not Republican or Democrat, because if you're taking advantage of it, it doesn't matter what party you belong to. And so you should have a bipartisan group inside the CFPB.
Elizabeth Warren and Democrats say you, Sean Duffy, and your party just want to empower the banks and the money lenders that have taken advantage of middle class and the working class people of this country.
So we passed a bill in Congress out of the House Financial Services that would have reformed the CFPB.
Okay.
Big banks were opposed to our bill, and the little banks loved it. They were applauding what we were doing because this agency is crushing the little guy. Because
shoving them out of business,
big government,
finding them out of business.
Big business can thrive with big regulation. It's the small guys that get crushed by those regulations, and that's why the big banks are okay with it.
And this week, the president made a lot of news. He basically replaced the head of that agency, the acting head of the agency, after the man who was in charge left. He appointed a woman who was under him, his chief of staff, as the deputy. And the president said, no, I'm going to appoint Mike Mulvaney, my budget director, as the head of that agency. They went to court. The court came down on the president's side.
That's right. So Richard Cordray was the director handpicked by Elizabeth Warren, a very progressive liberal guy. He resigns, and his chief of staff now becomes the acting director, Miss English. The president says, no, I have the right to appoint. He tasked Mick Mulvaney, the OMB director, put him temporarily at the CFPB. And the president won on that, which is important. I think he's going to act quickly to appoint a new director to the CFPB. They're going to push it through the Senate. So hopefully by January we have a new person who can bring common sense to consumer protection. And again, we want to protect consumers. We want to make sure that they have an outlet to have someone fight for them. But it's not an agency that's unaccountable, that's pushing an agenda that's partisan as opposed to fighting for people in the finance space.
Speaking of accountability, I have to ask you this before I let you go. The story breaking on Capitol Hill, really 2 weeks now. A fund, a slush fund created by Congress in 1995 that has paid out millions of dollars to those who claim they have been abused in some way or have some grievance against a member of Congress. This fund was set up through the Office of Compliance. They paid out to hundreds of people who've complained. Yes. We don't know who the members were that these settlements were paid on behalf of. It's shrouded in secrecy. Yep. Even the accuser can't name the person. It's all veiled behind this wall of secrets. Should that wall be breached? Is it time to release the names of those members?
So first, the chair and the ranking member of this committee, they see the recommendation for a payout, but they don't even see who the people are that were involved in
they're all masked.
Bad behavior. Yes.
Wow.
And so it's millions of dollars have been paid out, but it's for some members of Congress, but it's also for whether it's the police or the architect of the Capitol. Some claims were paid for asbestos, others for anthrax. There's been a lot of things that this fund has paid into.
Right.
But if people are doing things inappropriate on the Hill, and there's a settlement, you should expose it. I think the people have a right to know, especially when taxpayer money is being used. That's going to be an issue, Raymond, that continues to come up because it's the right thing to do, and I think the Congress. I didn't know this fund existed.
Well, no,
many of us didn't.
I've spoken to about 8 members of Congress this week.
There's a fund,
and none of them knew it existed. But of course, you wouldn't unless you filed under it, right?
Right.
And so maybe we're talking to the wrong people. There are others, I'll bet, who did know, and that list is going to come out. And it seems to me, a lot of these members so far. It's been Democratic members, people on the other side of the aisle from you who've been paid out.
Well, and I think if you look at the fund, I think you got to look at holistically. What were the scenarios of the payout, and what do the victims say? But again, when you pay money out with taxpayer money, the taxpayer has a right to know what's going on, and I think you're going to see more transparency come through in the next several weeks from the Congress.
Congressman Sean Duffy, thank you for being here.